I want to actually thank a number of people, and particularly my colleagues at Baptist University. I've often visited this university, and I always learn something, and it's one of my favorite universities within Hong Kong on it. And when I was in Macau, I often came over, and I know the people very well. And one of the things that's nice about Baptist is that they often don't, or is unfair, they often don't get the press and the recognition that they deserve within the Hong Kong system. I don't know how to change that, but at some point I hope that it truly does change on that. I always think of them as the middle child among the 8. But I think they've done a fantastic job in terms of our, so could we give a hand to the, this is somewhat of a special situation for me, and I'll tell you that in 2013, I went to the University of Macau to head up their Center for Teaching Excellence. And one of the first things I did is I called Todd. Actually, I think I met him in DC on it and said, hey, Todd, how do we get a Lilly conference into Asia? And it's taken us a while to do this, but I think it's been worthwhile. And sometimes things that are really, really good have a longer gestation period on it. So you've really made a goal of mine, a professional goal, to bring what I think are the premier teaching and learning conferences with a decade's history in the US here to Asia. And I hope that this will jumpstart a tradition, whether it's Lilly Asia, but that there will be regular teaching and learning meetings of this caliber here within the greater Asian area. The topic I'm going to talk about, I know nothing about, and I have the disadvantage of having multiple psychologists in the audience who actually probably understand this. So it's always fun to do things you don't know anything about. What we're going to do today, I'll give you a little background and context and tell you what motivation looks like, but I'm also going to get you to do some work. And that's part of the way I work, in that when I teach, my goal is to get students to do as much of the work as possible because it's less work for me. The advantage is they actually learn by doing this. They don't necessarily are happy about it, but they actually realize that they learned and they think it's worthwhile. So one of the slides I often use, this is one of the challenges we face, but our students face this even more so. The world is changing at an unprecedented rate. So this is really a difficult situation for us, or actually not so much for me. I'm old enough, so, and there are some of us in the audience who've retired multiple times, that it's not quite such a stress factor. But it truly is changing, and the rate seems to be accelerating. Okay? So what I want to do is start in this one, which is the final plenary, by looking at the opening plenary. And from the opening plenary, this is from Todd. Slides, I stole all of his slides. Teaching is the profession that makes all professions possible. And he made a good argument. I, however, raise one question, though. This is the data that says 63% of today's elementary students will have jobs that don't exist today. So how are we going to make possible things we don't know? So it's a really big challenge, and that's the changing nature of this. So we need to make sure our students acquire those sets of skills and attributes that will be useful, effective, and allow them to be successful in a rapidly changing world. This is a slide. I actually got an email yesterday because I often use, and this is one, yeah. Teaching is leading students into a situation in which they can only escape by thinking. I wish this looks like one very bright student. This looks like my students on that. But I think this is really one of my goals, and I think it's one of the goals for all of the people in the audience. One of the things that will help your students be successful is if they learn to think on it. And that is difficult, challenging, and they often would prefer not to think. They just want to know the answer and what will be on the test. Many of us think that teaching equals learning. And they are certainly related and connected, but they are not the same. I've observed lots of classes, and I've taught a class where I thought I did a wonderful amount of teaching and there was no learning. And I've also seen a lot of learning that didn't ever require me on it. This is the type of project-based learning, the type of assessment ones, which empower students where they learn. And why do they learn that? Because they're motivated on that. And that's part of what I want to come back to. Because one of the questions that, for those of you who are faculty developers, you've heard it every time you give a talk. Somebody will ask, how do I motivate the students in my class? My answer is, it depends. But I'm going to give you the answer at the end on it, so watch for the answer. It'll be on the test. They didn't tell you that at the end before. If you want lunch, you got to get at least an 80 on the test. And it's based on all of the plenary, so I hope you took good notes. It's a pop quiz. Yeah, I know. I also like this slide because it's the importance of what we need to do, of today's world. It's from Alvin Toffler, who's a futurist. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so if you have faculty who cannot unlearn and relearn, they may be going down the path of becoming illiterate or obsolete. So these are sort of the context that when we think about effective teaching and learning that we need to really think about. It's a new world. Okay. I think this may be one of the goals, and it's in many of the attributes in the mission statements. Learning how to learn in a changing world is a new goal for effective teaching. If you can teach your students and have them practice learning, they will be successful. And if you don't know how to do this, I'll give a plug to Todd's book. This is actually, this is edition 2. I've read edition 1. This is a really good book. When I was at Macau, we gave away more than 100 of these because it's very readable. It's written for students, so it's really good reading for faculty on it. So this one, look for. You should buy the second edition. It's half the price of the first one. Yeah, the third one's going to be free. Talk to Todd. So, if you're going to talk about learning, and for the psychologists and the cognitive scientists in the room, this is the stage theory of learning, and Todd presented it and explained it, and this will be on the second part of the test. But I'm going to add one other part, and that is none of this occurs if there's no motivation. Students need to be motivated to learn, and that's what we're going to, in part, focus on. How do you enhance student motivation to learn? But we'll spend some time talking about or thinking about all the things that can be a hindrance or undermine motivation. Sometimes we do these purposely, but often we do them unconsciously. So this will be also on the quiz on it, and you'll need to be able to describe all the parts of the brain and how they function on which piece, and what anticipatory outcomes, value, interest, understanding, intention mean, but you only need to know the definition. I like this slide a lot, and what I think we need to add to it, and I'm not sure where to put it, is that somewhere, probably wrapped around this piece, is motivation, and the role that motivation plays in each of these. Okay. I expect that this quote is in every cultural piece on that. It's a variation on one that's very common in the US, but I expect there must be a Chinese equivalent. And it's, this one is by Mario Cortez. A good teacher will lead the horse to water. An excellent teacher will make the horse thirsty first. And so part of our goal as excellent teachers is to make those students thirsty for the learning and thirsty for the knowledge. So they're motivated to this. And if you ever dealt with horses, they do what they want. They outweigh you about 10 to 1 on it. And so you really need to convince, you really have to have them decide what you want them to do is what they want to do. And in part, if you think about your class, and if you have 100 students in there, they outnumber you 100 to 1. And again, it's the same issue. Okay. Now, put this one down. Motivation is different from some of these. They're involved, and I like this dog picture a lot. But it's different from just engagement or interest, tenacity, or self-efficacy. These are all important components, but any one of those, in and of themselves, is not necessarily motivation or will lead to it. And you could have motivation with only a subset of these on that. So what I want to remind you is that motivation, there are definitions of it, and you can do this in a variety of ways. The easiest way, of course, is to Google it. So motivation is a psychological state that serves to activate and sustain behaviors that lead to a goal. This comes out of a really good book. This is How People Learn Too from the National Academy Press. Came out about 9 months or a year ago. And it has a whole chapter on motivation on that. And so I stole everything from my colleagues at NRC. But learning occurs, and we know this because this is what Todd told us in Help. Learning occurs through active, sustained behavior. You don't learn things like that. It's the repetition, the pieces in doing this. So those are connected. So motivation and learning and sustained behavior have a direct connection. One of the things that affects or influences motivation are goals. So goals are where you or the student want to be. And we can think about types of goals and we can classify them. Often we classify them into two forms, mastery goals and performance goals. And mastery goals are those where understanding and learning the material and skills are for self-gratification and progress towards a goal. There may be many reasons for that. So when students at the University of Maryland who are pre-med students take organic chemistry, they are not taking it because it is the goal there. They're taking it because their goal is to be a physician. And they recognize this. So the goal can be for a secondary piece on it. Many, if you think of people in performance, often the goal for being able to play an instrument or play a sport on it is for self-gratification and progress towards a goal. I recently, a few years ago, took up golf. And so my goal in golf is simply do at least as good as I did the last time. And other than that, I don't care. So it's not to be not to win at golf, but to master to the best of my ability. Performance goals are different. And students often have these. And they are not mutually exclusive. It's the comparison to others in ranking. Am I a 4.0 student? Am I a 2.7 student on that? Sometimes those numbers matter, but if it's only to be the best on that, then it often short circuits or short changes that person because they're focused on how well they do compared to others as opposed to how well they master something. This is one of my pet peeves about pre-med students, and that they are often very competitive and often very cutthroat on it. When in fact, this is not what we want or what I want in my physician. I want somebody who's going to treat me as a whole person and solve my problems, not to beat the physician in the next hospital. Okay. I don't know if you've seen this. I'm going to show you a short trailer. If you haven't, this is a wonderful National Geographic film. And I'm just going to show the trailer. And I want you to think whether this person has a performance goal or a mastery goal. So this is, it's on the TED Talk, and this is one of the very few people in the world that does freelance or free climbing, meaning he climbs with no ropes, and he's climbing El Capitan, which is one of probably the hardest vertical climb in the US. It's 3,000, or it's about 1,000 meters sheer cliff up on that. And he does it, and they filmed that, and this is the first time it was ever done. Is he motivated? Yes. Is it mastery? He is a master climber. He's been doing this his whole life. Is it performance? Yes. He's the #1 climber in the world. That's why National Geographic filmed him on it. And it is a high risk. This is a case where you only get one mistake in this piece. If he makes a mistake, he dies. And he knows that. And that's the kind of confidence pieces on that. I think we can just go on. While he's doing it, what we're going to do is talk performance goals and mastery goals. These actually align to mindset. So the growth mindset really is alignment, and we think about it in terms of mastery goals, and the performance one is more the fixed mindset. And when you deal with your students, and as we know, we can change that partially. So what I want you to do in the meantime, I want you to take out a piece of paper or your phone. You're going to need your phone anyways, but I want you to take out a piece of paper, and I want you to make a list. You can work with the person side of you of things that teachers might do that hinder or compromise student motivation to learn. Things that hinder or compromise student motivation. So again, let's start this group. Things that hinder student motivation that you do, or what she does, or what he does. Which one? Hinder motivation. What? Not prepare. So if you walk in and you have not prepared for your lecture, students pick up on this, that does not increase motivation on this. What do your teachers do that make you, that decrease motivation? Oh, doing unfair comparison. Yeah, you got to be careful when you're making students actually are real people. And over here, yes. When teachers praise students and say, oh, you're so smart, you'll be so successful. And the person over here, like me, who worked really hard and only got a C+ on it, doesn't get any praise, and I feel less than that. One of the side pieces one of the things I do, I've been taking for longer than most of the people here would imagine, is I've been taking Mandarin for a very long time, and we measure this in decades, not in years, and I always do poorly because I don't practice. Negative attitude, right. The course doesn't matter, and why am I wasting my time teaching when I could be doing research, right? Or my colleague's course doesn't matter. You're the other teacher. Right. So the motivation piece on it. Okay, so One of the things that when we look at motivation, we often talk about intrinsic and extrinsic. And I'm going to presume if you don't already know these terms, take out your phone and type them in. You can pull this one up. Basically, what intrinsic means, you're doing it, that's a mastery piece. And extrinsic is more the performance one. And again, I remind you that each of those, there's overlap, and often students have both of them for a given piece. Okay? So what I asked you to do was think about things that undermine student motivation, and if we've been running it on the Mac, which the system doesn't like, what we would have done is I would have had you collected them all electronically, and we could have seen what you were doing. But we didn't, and so let me give you sort of the ones I've been thinking about. So these are things that can hinder or reduce motivation to learn, and we heard those. One of the ones you may not recognize is physical environments are really important. A good learning space makes a huge difference. And if you have to teach in a dreary classroom that is crowded, dark, and the air conditioning is either loud or not working, people are not motivated to either teach or learn. So those make a difference. One of the things I learned at the Lily O conference last November, I was at a really nice session, and one of the people said, got to fix this problem, because he taught in a really not very nice room. But what he would do when he had students do group work, he'd say, I want you to get together and discuss this. You got 10 minutes. Oh, by the way, walk, go outside, come back on it. And what happened is the quality of the discussions went up. And we know that for a number of reasons. One, it got them out in the light. But the other thing, you'll notice I'm walking, and because when you're walking, you mentally process quicker and better on that. That's why it's always good. That's why I walk the dog in the morning. I have my best conversations with them. Okay. You don't have control. This is the other one, life matters, the student's life. There are many reasons why they may not be motivated at a certain time. They broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. They're having problems at home. They may feel threatened. They're the only person like them in this whole class on that. Believe me, I've been in classes where all of the other people were women. I am threatened on that. This sense of not belonging. And that can be a sense of not belonging to the university. Particularly, this is often common and connected to the imposter syndrome for first-year students on that. They see this, but nobody in their family has ever been to university, and they feel they don't belong on it. Stereotypic threat. For those of you who don't know this, take out your phone, Google it. There's a lot of information on this. This is the idea that girls can't do math, or people of certain ethnicities on that, or I can't do this or that. It's not true. It's been proven, and Erie Treisman's work have shown it. But it's real. There's no question about it. And world events, or life events, but also world events. Here in Hong Kong, what happens outside the university affects motivation within on that. So during the umbrella movement, during SARS here in Hong Kong, 9/11 in the US, other pieces, those types of world events affect student motivation. Okay. These are harder to control on it, and often you can't. These are ones you can, or at least influence. Teacher attitudes, we heard that. If the teacher's condescending, unenthusiastic, or MOA. Anybody know what MOA is? Mad on arrival. You just sat through an hour and a half of traffic, and you just made your class, and you didn't have any time to prep. You got to just leave it at the door. But it occurs, okay? And then the other one, at many universities, faculty feel tremendous pressure to do research because on that. And so they don't see teaching as valued. That is, in most cases, not true, but the perception is there, and it's a very, very strong one. How you do assessments and pieces can impact. If the assessments are too hard or too easy, it doesn't motivate. If you give really, really easy tests, students quickly realize, I don't need to study for this, I don't need to learn it. And if it's too hard, I can't do this, it's not worth my time on that. Or if it's unclear on that. And boring pedagogies, whatever that may mean to you. What content's too simple, too hard, or too abstract. And that you can control. Okay. Things, this is the list. We'll on it for those who don't like. Okay. Things that increase motivation. This is what we wanted to get to. Positive attitude on that. Whether you have it or not, fake it. That's what we tell graduate students, we tell beginning faculty. If you're not enthusiastic, it doesn't matter whether you want to be there or not, you are there. Make the best of it, but make sure that students feel that you think it's important to be there, because if you think it's not, they're not going to be there. Caring and helpful. You have to find out where that piece is on it. Sometimes, and this is one that's somewhat difficult, it's complex because it also has gender relationships. I have to be very careful how caring and helpful I am towards female students. And if you're a female professor, you need to be careful about how caring and helpful you are towards male students. In the US, this is incredible. But you can't not be. And so that piece, they need to feel that you care about them and that you are there to help them. You need to feel that the work you're doing, the teaching, is important. It is. It's the most important work and the most impactful work you'll do as a professional. Your publications may get, even if it gets you cited hundreds of times, probably won't have the impact of those students, those 1,000 students who go out into the world and change it. How you do is straightforward. Assignments that are scaffolding, that are helpful. Assignments and teaching that's engaging. Empowering on that. So empower your students. Let them do the work. Saves you time. That's one of the reasons we flip classes work. You actually, once you get it down, there's not as much work as lecturing for 75 minutes and getting the content right. It needs to be engaging. Got to be at the right level, relevant, real world, and important. It's harder in some disciplines than others. It's, to make that. I can tell you when I teach intro bio, and it's always been a big class, 200 to 300, there are two modules that where students are always motivated and engaged. The module on sex and the module on cancer. The module on sex, I don't have to explain why they're interested in it. They're 18 to 22. The module on cancer is if you ask any audience, do you know somebody, friend, family, associate, that have had an interaction with cancer, it's above 90%. It's meaningful and real to them. Okay. These are within teachers' control. So, we're back to Todd's slide, and where does motivation fit? And we're almost back to the question. And that's the answer. You want to motivate your students, do good teaching. So good teaching motivates. Bad teaching has the counter effect. So the answer to my colleagues who ask me, how do I motivate my students? Be a good teacher. If you don't know how, find the center at your university. They will help you. Or find a mentor on that. It's not rocket science, but you can't just wing it on that. Or convince your dean or chair to send you to a Lilly conference. It's fun. You'll learn a lot. And you get to go to nice places. So good teaching motivates learning. That's the take-home lesson on it. If you want it. And the reason we need to do this is that students really do need motivation of learning how to learn because of this what's going on. This is, these are the change. Look at the rates here. We won't even put here, this is at 2000. If we go out to 2018, new technologies come in within less than a year. A generation ago, it was a decade. Okay. So at this point, I think I'm just about on time. I got 6 minutes on it. So we're going to do some questions and comments. So we have enough time. Glenn.
There seems to be a movement or a trend that sort of mindfulness, and that students might, at the beginning of a class, just sit and be quiet and settle in and sort of put the rest of the world away, and maybe the teacher leads in that thing. Does that help, and is that related to motivation in that sense of, if you declutter the mind, the natural motivation emerges? Is there any virtue in this,
yes,
or is this a kind of a new agey trend?
No, it's, well, maybe a new agey trend, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have virtue on it. The answer is yes, for many reasons. So one of the things you can do, if you want to set a tone for your classes, use music in the beginning, and you can set it at different ways. And many good faculty members do that. It really helps the class to settle down. Before I walk into any class that I'm teaching, I spend 30 seconds doing breathing and centering myself. We practice this. When I give exams to very large groups of people at Maryland, before we handed out the exam, we had everybody sort of just focus for 30 seconds. And it really made a difference, and the students liked it. So yes, but I think that from cognitive science, from psychology, from even what we know neurophysiologically, this is a good thing to do. So now you can just tell them to use the app on their phone. There's lots of the good ones there. Other questions or comments?
Thank you very much for answering my question, Professor. The question was how to motivate students.
Oh, there we
yes,
go.
I'm here. Yes, how to motivate students. And I absolutely agree with you that good teaching is definitely going to motivate students over there. My follow-up question is that the problem at my university, University of the West Indies, is that many times students are not coming to class. Yes. So we do all type of things, do posting like, different type of systems, try to do different things, but they just don't want to come to class. Many times they would come to the last class where they would want to hear what are some of the things which are going to come in the final examination. Yes. So this type of things are happening over there. So what can we do to bring or attract students in the classroom environment? In terms of good teaching, there is no problem of good teaching. Excellent lecturers are there, but students have to come to class. So anything on that? Thank you very much.
So I can tell you, if I was in West Indies and my choice is the beach or a good lecture, I can tell you who wins on it. You had a situation where you're competing with an environment on that. That is not an easy question. There are many ways you could approach that. If the main assessment is the final, get rid of the final and space it out across, if you can do that. They'll show up for the test. So make the test every other week. They'll at least show up every other week or every week on that. We do this, that's why the flipped classes work. One of the issues in the US is everywhere else, students don't read. You assign the textbook and they don't read. In biology class with 300 people, I didn't have this problem, because we assigned a reasonable amount of reading, and we told them at the end of the reading, before they came to class, they had to answer the 4 questions on the learning management system. 90% of the students skimmed and read those questions. It was getting them to open the book. There are many techniques. Check Todd's book, check many of those. That'll help. But the answer is, if they're still scoring 80 or 90 on the final and not coming to class, don't worry about it. They got it. The question is your final measuring what you want them to learn? If it is, why worry?
Before you move on, though, are you at Mona? Yeah, if you're you, Mona, check with Mervyn.
We have 1 minute left.
Yes, I have a question. Yes.
Yes.
And Spencer, thank you very much. This is such an important topic in education, motivation, and also thanks for mentioning music because I music education is very important to have music. And so my question is, in Hong Kong, a lot of the students, in order to get into universities, they just took exams and study, and their purpose of studying is to get good grades. And when they are here at the university, they continue this motivation to get good grades instead of motivation to learn. How would you advise us to help them? Because it's an attitude change and it's not easy. What do you think we can do?
I think the problem, if I had an answer to that, I wouldn't have to, I could fund the Lilly Conference on it. This is the question, the same one everywhere. We have on it. The school systems around the world, the US one, to a large degree, they come. This is in part, I think Baptist is doing quite a bit in terms of this is the whole person education and helping students come in and reframe what education means and what the difference is between higher education and primary through secondary education. It is here to learn a set of skills and learn how to think. Now, there are really good primary, secondary systems everywhere in the world, and certainly here in Hong Kong, and they come in and do this. But that's the challenge. You've got to get them to help them reframe, and you can't do it overnight. It takes a while, so a year or two. If you can figure out how to do this with a single course, patent the course, but none of the ones I know, sort of the student orientation course, the idea the student will magically become from a high school student to a full-fledged university student with the right attitude by taking one course doesn't seem to work. It's a journey, and that journey takes about 2 years to do that. That's what general education's about and why it's placed. So no easy solution on that one, anywhere. I think we're at time. Yeah, I can take one more.
Instructor's mindset.
So instructors' mindsets. I'm going to actually punt that question to Milt Cox because the only way I've seen that's been efficient in changing instructor mindset is through learning communities. They change when their colleagues begin and they work together. It doesn't work if you're the director of a center and tell them to change it. Those few individuals would probably arrive at.
No? What you got that?
Except unless you're in Eva's center. She has this magic touch with faculty, right? The only way, at Maryland and at Macau, the only way we could move that culture was through learning communities, and there are many ways of doing it. It's a slow process at Maryland. It took us 10 years to get that body of 200 to 400 faculty so it was engaged. That's the only one I know that works consistently. Other things work, but they're not as effective or have no longevity.
Thank you.